Okay. Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the NIHR Leeds BRC seminar series. My name is Dr. Yusuf. I am a consultant rheumatologist and senior research fellow at University of Leeds. I'm here moderating on behalf of my capacity of academic capacity development emerging lead. And I also have my colleague, Dr. Carol Burnett, who is the ACD lead, and we are presenting this on behalf of our ACD committee. So today is the last series of this calendar year. So the topic is very timely. As we know, in health research, sometimes conflict may arise. So hopefully we will learn a lot of tips today to how to manage these conflicts without jeopardizing our career. So before we start, I just want to highlight a few house rules. So everyone has been automatically set to be muted when we set up the meeting invite. So please don't unmute yourself when you come in because it can disrupt the flow of presentation and also the echo. Other thing as well is the Q&A session will be done at the end of the session. So I'll be grateful if you could pop in any question that you have to the presenters in the chat room so that I can read out to the presenters. If anything too lengthy or not quite clear, I might just be able just to, just ask yourself to, to post the question yourself as well. Other thing as well is I'm just going to share, so if you do have phone with you, we would like to encourage feedback for our seminar series. So what you think is done well or things that can be improved, and certainly what we want to know is from you, because this seminar is for your development. What else do you want a topic to be included at the next calendar year? So basically, if you have your phone now, so just scan the QR code. And after that, you can fill it. It only takes about 2 minutes of your time. We were grateful for that. And also, whoever filled the form will actually get electronic certificate, which just uploaded to your email, within the next 3 to 4 minutes. So, and it's a nice certificate as well. Okay. So, right. So, for those who don't have any phone, we will email you the link after the meeting. So I'm going to stop sharing now. So today we are privileged to have two presenters. So they're both from the University of Leeds. So we have Danny Hanna, who is a senior head of leadership organizational development, and also we have Ollie Richardson, who is organizational learning partner officer. So without further ado, I'll leave the floor to you.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
You come through, right, great, lovely. Okay, and are the slides that, can you see the slides as well?
Yeah, I will confirm when I see it. Yeah.
Okay, have they appeared?
Not yet.
Okay, I'll just try that again. So it's clicked off for a moment. There we go. Have they appeared now?
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, all clear.
Good.
Yeah.
Great. Right, let's get started. Well, thank you for inviting us. Delighted to be here, talk about this really important topic. Before we get into the session, I'd like to introduce, first of all, myself and my colleague, Ollie Richardson. So Ollie and I work within a team within what we call ODPL within University of Leeds. So those of you who are coming from outside of the university, ODPL stands for Organisational Development and Professional Learning. So we provide people-focused development for researchers, for those involved in teaching, but also for leaders and managers across the university. And it's leaders and managers that the team Ollie and I specifically work in, which is called Leadership and Organisational Development. That's where our real focus is. Ollie, who's an organisational learning partner, In a moment, we'll talk you through some very specific methodology that we use as part of our development in the university. Ollie's a specialist in a methodology called Crucial Conversations, and he'll be using some of that methodology today to give us a sense of structure and approach when you're faced with having a difficult conversation, and hopefully broaden your thinking on how to maybe address those trickier moments. Our team provides development for leaders and managers on having challenging and crucial conversations with their teams. And for those of you who work in the university, you can access this development via the link on this page, and we'll share the slides following the session. But we also have in the past provided what we call bespoke interventions, where we design some content specifically for one team or a specific community. And it's that bespoke approach that we'll hear from Ollie from in a moment. So here's the plan. I will pass over to Ollie, who will first of all talk you through a structured approach around having challenging conversations, thing to think about, some tips and techniques you might want to employ when having those conversations. Within Ollie's presentation, we'll seek to highlight how to have a challenging conversation by providing a role-played example. So you'll see Ollie and I transform into actors and present an example of a challenging conversations. We have practice, so hopefully it won't be too wooden, but we'll see how we get on. So we'll do that for you. The idea really is to bring to life some of the theory that Ollie will talk through and give you a sense of how it might look in reality. And the final thing that we'll do is I will talk you through a very specific case study, a very specific example that I personally was involved with quite recently, and how we supported a leader in the university to have a very challenging conversation with a member of their team. And then we'll think together around what the learning might be for you. And as Yus has said, we'll finish up with a Q&A. So any questions that occur to you as we go through our presentation, please record them. I'm very happy to come back to those questions at the end. But for now, I'm going to pass you over to Ollie.
Thanks, Danny. Can everyone hear me okay now? Am I coming through clear? Yep. Great. Well, no, thanks, Danny. And again, just to reiterate the thanks for inviting us along to talk about this really complex subject of challenging, difficult, crucial, however you want to term it in terms of conversations. What I'll do, Danny, is I'll take over sharing the screen just for now, just so that we're not having to go back to COVID times and say, next slide, please. So let me go ahead and hopefully that comes through to everyone on that now. So I'll just give a moment for the technology to keep up. So what I want to do is start by saying that the content and the theory and the examples that we're going to be presenting to you today is really an introduction to this topic. It really is, from my opinion, on difficult conversations, very situational and very context-based, based on the area that you work in, and also based on the challenges that you may be experiencing in that local context as well. But hopefully what you'll be able to recognize and see throughout the session content is how this can translate across all different practices and disciplines as well. So we will talk about that quite generally. As Danny referenced at the start as well, this has been adapted from a accredited training course, which is called Crucial Conversations. That's an accredited course by a company called Vital Smart, and it's really based on two main theories. So that is transactional analysis and the ladder of inference, which was developed by Chris Adjuris as well. So that's where this is really going to be founded on. What you will get in addition to the slides is a copy of the first chapter of the book that comes from as well. And I do encourage you to actively seek that out for further information, because there's a lot of really useful information and guidance in there as well. But that's enough of the context. I'm going to speak, like I said, for about 15 minutes on this. So in that introduction to difficult conversations, I think quite often what we get asked is, well, what really causes them? What are the different factors that make up difficult conversations, and what's at the root cause? And I think that there can be a lot of complexity and different elements that come into play. But really, when you boil it down, for me, there are three main elements that bring up difficult conversations. I've just popped them onto the screen now. So number one, opposing opinions. We've got to be in disagreement about something. If not, we're in agreement and there's not a difficult conversation to be had. Number two, strong emotions. There's got to be an emotional attachment to what you're talking about. There's got to be something of real importance and meaning to that conversation. Otherwise, again, we can probably move past it and be able to say, well, that doesn't really matter in that instance. And then the final thing is the high stakes element. So that means, is there going to be a consequence of not achieving something? Is there going to be a consequence of us not getting to a conclusion which is positive for all parties involved? And if you have all three of these elements in play here, then what we're talking about to you today is absolutely going to be useful. Now, what tends to happen is when we come at this and see these three different elements, that we tend to get what we're calling our silence and violence response. So we'll be faced with the situation, we'll be faced with the scenario, we'll be faced with a story. And what is likely to happen is, because we love to consume information and we love to make sense of different things, but sometimes struggle to give that the time that it requires, we can tend to make assumptions, fill in the gaps, and really jump to conclusions which are not helpful to having a positive conversation. And as a result, depending on what our default style is, and that's where styles can very much come into play here. And like I said, the situational context can really have an important factor to play. It makes us go to a default. So one default, one side of the spectrum could be something what we can call silence. That's where we might become quite reserved, quite within ourselves. We're going to avoid the conflict. And the other side of that spectrum is something that we'll call violence, for want of a better phrase. Now, I don't mean actual physical violence, but maybe where it's manifesting itself and becoming overly assertive, potentially even aggressive, passive aggressive, and will maybe go on the attack a little bit more as well. Now, I think it's fair to say that everyone on the session today can say, if we go to either of those silence or violence extremes, is that going to be helpful? Is that creating that atmosphere of transparency, honesty, and authenticity to have the conversation and get to the positive outcomes that we want to do? And does it actually mean that we act in a way which isn't productive? So these are all the different elements that we need to be considering about. And quite often it's caused by what I'm going to just call something simple, a misunderstanding, a misrepresentation, or maybe just not getting all the information. Like I said, we're putting in those assumptions and jumping to those conclusions. And really, that's what we need to first start with when we're faced with these situations, is try and look at it from all different perspectives and gather that full understanding so that we can bring our true story out to the forefront. So I'm going to bring up this diagram now. So what tends to happen is that we'll get a situation, a reality, a story, a conversation, or a topic. And what we will do is we will look at that through our lens, through our perspective. So this is you at the moment. And what the other person, potentially in this conflict or difficult conversation or difficult situation, will do is they'll do exactly the same, but just mirror that behavior. They will look at it from their perspective. And that's where quite often we'll get that disagreement or challenge or conflict or whatever you want to call that. Now, the trick that we need to do is to take time to be able to look at it from their perspective to try and make sure that we are having a positive output, a positive conversation. And that can be really difficult to do because actually it does take time and it's something that you can't rush. It's something that we need to identify in terms of saying, well, what could be causing this for this individual? What are the background scenarios? What is the information that is not entirely visible to me at the very get-go? Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop onto the slides a bit of a framework to be able to help us to gather that information and to try and come to a bit more clarity and understanding. But like I said, we've just really got to consider that it's all about perspective and also understanding everyone's that's involved in that. So let me, like I said, introduce you to this approach to difficult conversations. So what, again, we'll be faced with is that situation, that story, or that topic. Now, what the best thing to do is to start off with that basis of wanting to ask a question in an open and non-confrontational way. We want to try and question and gather that meaning so that we can fully understand it from all sides of that party. So when you're faced with that situation, the best thing to do is potentially say nothing for the first couple of seconds. Compose yourself before responding. It's important to remember that you respond and not react. Again, if we think back to that first triangle that I put onto the screen, if we've got opposing opinions, strong emotions, and high stakes, it's really easy to just jump into that response straight away because we'll go with our default response. But try and avoid that natural behavior, which does take practice and it does take time to do, and try and gather that information by responding and not reacting. Then what you want to do is show acknowledgement for what their concerns could be in that situation. So, for example, if they are putting across genuine issues based on a topic or scenario that you've experienced, then it's really important that we do approach that with that level of authenticity and take on board their concerns and acknowledge that as well. So make sure that you repeat, paraphrase what they've said, try and empathize with their situation as well, but also try and help them realize how something may come across. But it's important that you own that for yourself. We're not saying that, oh, this person has said this against you and this person has said this against you. We're owning that conversation and making sure that we're giving that full transparency, like I said at the beginning. After you've given that acknowledgement, then I would say it's your time to shine. It's very much your time to give that response to the individual. So make sure that you share your viewpoint, make sure that you show your experience and your story with that individual, and make sure that you share how you feel about what they said or think. And that can be quite uncomfortable to do, because actually it means that we're putting ourselves in potentially a bit of a vulnerable situation, because we're expressing what our feelings and emotions are in that workplace. But it's really important that we do keep that human element to this, and we don't just come across really robotic, just constantly. I know that considering policy is on there if that's appropriate in your organisation or if you're at the University of Leeds, but we need to make sure that this is a human-to-human interaction. It's important to be honest and consider your behaviour and style, because what you will likely see is that that will be mirrored against you as well. And then finally, in terms of this process, consider that counter question. It's really important that you get that collective buy-in when you approach with these challenging conversations and situations. So try and take a what do you suggest approach. That ultimately is going to allow the other individual to have that investment into what you've just said, and also investment into the idea for coming to a positive resolution as well. Make sure that you're initiating the dialogue and help them see things not just from your perspective, but their perspective as well. Remember to be solution and future focused on there. Now, this might seem like a really, oh, well, that's an obvious framework, isn't it? But I promise if you do follow these steps and you do take this approach and make sure that you respond rather than react, you're making sure that you're empathizing and acknowledging their viewpoints, sharing and having full ownership over your story and your viewpoints, and take that what do you suggest approach, then you will already be on that way to having much more productive conversations in that state of play. There's one final thing that I want to share with you before I hand over to Danny and we do that live role play that we've been teasing to you already. And that is all around this element of psychological safety. Now, if we're in an environment where individuals feel that they can't share their viewpoints because they're worried that that will be used against them in the future, or that they're worried that they're going to be almost, again, under attack, like I suggested before, then that's not going to be conducive to having that productive conversation. So it's important that, again, we do what we can as either leaders and managers or colleagues to make sure that we set up the environment for safety. And that's really important, because what I'd suggest is that people rarely become defensive about what you're saying, the content. People become defensive because of why they think you're saying it, which is the intention that sits behind it. So, for example, if Danny is my people manager, if he comes to me and says, Ollie, I'd like to talk to you about your performance. Fundamentally, there's nothing wrong with that phrase. He's just saying that he wants to talk to me about my performance. But I've got a complete lack of clarity and understanding about, well, what does that mean? And my mind is probably going to be going to, well, what have I done wrong? Is he going to be talking to me about underperformance? Is he going to be talking to me about how I've acted unprofessionally? Is he going to be talking to me about any other number of things? And it's likely that we will shift more towards that negative slant point of view. However, if Danny had said in that initial communication, Ollie, I'd like to talk to you about your performance. In the last project that you did a cracking job, and I'd like to talk about reward and recognition. instantly a completely different response from me. I'd probably be completely embarrassed and go bright red, as Danny will know. But I'm then going into that conversation with full clarity. I know what we're going to be talking about, and that's going to be really helpful. So you need to make sure that you're laying those foundations for safety before the conversation. And these are just some top tips that I would suggest. So nothing should be a surprise. Don't go in there with the viewpoint of, and here's another thing, and here's another thing. Make sure that there is that clarity that's provided in advance. Don't let things fester. Don't build something up in your head and go down that downward spiral. Consider your meeting environment. I mean, my bias is probably to say that face-to-face is always more productive in these sorts of things, but I do appreciate that we live in a hybrid working environment. So if it is online, make sure that you are setting those ground rules or housekeeping like yours did at the start of today, making sure your cameras are on, making sure that you can see that visibility and that you've got enough time to do it as well. I think quite often what happens is that we'll go into these meetings with an agenda and we haven't made sure that we've got that agreed and combined goal. As I said at the start, we tend to try and rush to that resolution and get to that quickly. So make sure that we give time and space. And then the last but not least, certainly, is that we can tend to do all this great work. We follow that framework. We've got understanding of what's at the cause of it, and we know where we want to get to. But then because we're very busy individuals, very busy professionals, we tend not to do the most important thing, which is following up on actions. So who's going to do what by when, and agreeing how we will follow up. And sometimes that does mean that that needs to be a bit more formal, whether that's actually calendar invites, something written down. But again, it's all in that purpose of providing that clarity of information as well. So like I said, that was a really brief introduction. We could probably spend a full day. I mean, the accredited course on this is actually a 2-day full course, talking about all the particulars and all the particular details. As Danny said, if you're a member of the University of Leeds, you can access a more in-depth version, and you've reminded us to signpost you to your relevant OD teams as well, which I'm sure will offer something in these particular fields. But hopefully that just gives you an indication in terms of some of the areas to consider, or a framework that you can maybe approach and use as well. I'm just going to invite Danny to see if he wants to add any points on that. And then what we can do is maybe stop sharing the slides and go straight into our live action role play.
Let's do that.
Great. Okay. So let me set the scene. So this is the scenario. We are going to be taking on the personas of Taylor and Morgan. So Taylor has received feedback from other team members that Morgan often dominates conversations in team meetings, leaving little space for others to contribute. Taylor needs to address this in a constructive way that promotes awareness and growth without alienating Morgan. So the context is that a meeting is scheduled between the two staff members to discuss this. So like I said, I'll stop sharing my screen now, and then we will go straight into it. So bear with me 2 seconds. I'm going to be taking on the persona of Taylor, and Danny is going to be taking on the persona of Morgan. So let's get into it. Hey, Morgan, I appreciate you making the time to chat today. I wanted to talk to you about something I've noticed in our team meetings, and I'm bringing it up because of how invested you are in your work at the moment.
Yeah, thanks, Taylor. Yeah, delighted to talk about that. How can I help?
Thank you. So you always bring lots of ideas and energy, which I really value, and I know the rest of the team really value as well. But at the same time, I've observed that some of the others find it hard to contribute during discussions. Have you noticed that, or have you had any sense of that dynamic?
I mean, sometimes I do find that people can be a bit quiet sometimes. It's a shame, because I think some people will contribute. I'm not entirely sure why people sit back. It'd be nice if people did contribute more.
Okay, thank you. So what do you think might be at the cause of that? Have you noticed anything in particular in the team meetings?
Well, there are times where I feel that I'm doing most of the contribution, most of the work, with the ideas and suggestions. Others do seem to sit back more. So I do feel sometimes it's falling more to me. I would love it if people got more involved in some of the debates, if I'm honest. Taylor, it feels to me that is a bit imbalanced at times.
Okay. And what do you think is causing people to be reserved and sit back?
I'd love to know. I would love to know. I mean, I'd like to hear more from them, really.
Okay.
Why is it a bit of complaint or something? What's happened?
No complaint. This is very much just me and you having a conversation, and I just want to talk to you about it from what I've observed and experienced. So let me give you an example from that. That might be the best place to go with this.
Okay.
So in the last team meeting, when you were presenting the quarterly report and you were giving the figures and the updates, you were so enthusiastic and passionate about the topic that when others tried to ask a question or to contribute, you would often finish their sentences for them or jump straight in with the answer. And I picked up that maybe others felt that they weren't able to contribute their ideas from that.
Well, I wasn't aware of that. I've got to be honest. I mean, clearly, I prepared the report, and it's a subject close to my interest, and I'm keen to ensure that I do it justice. I wasn't aware I was interrupting other people or finishing their sentences, though. I wouldn't want to do that. As I say, I absolutely value others' contributions. I just find at times that I don't get a lot back from everybody. It seems to me that people aren't really contributing as much.
No, absolutely. And let's make sure what I think we can both agree on is that we want to just create these really positive meeting atmospheres and environments where everyone can contribute to them. And your engagement and passion and enthusiasm is a real strength that you bring to the team, and I don't want to lose that at all. So what I'd love to work on together is finding ways to make space for everyone's input so that all voices are heard. And maybe that's something we can both be more intentional about. Maybe I could support by taking an active role in facilitating the flow of the conversation a bit more actively.
Yeah, I mean, that would help, Taylor, actually. I do feel that if there is a bit of a vacuum there, I will fill that with my own views. And if you could help by bringing others in, that might just help me to step back a little bit, and people won't feel necessarily that I'm filling that space, maybe.
Great. And is there anything else that you would suggest that you could contribute to that as well? So if I take a more active role in the facilitation, is there anything else that you could contribute to?
Well, I'm now more cognizant of that tendency to fill that space. The last thing I want to do is talk over people and crowd them out. So if I'm more conscious of that, and you help out by facilitating the discussion in the way that you've described, I think that might help us.
Great, thanks. So that'd be great, and I really appreciate you being open to the feedback and us just to be able to have this honest conversation. How about what we do is we go for the next team meeting with these actions and these ideas of active facilitation and the contributions that you suggested. And what we'll do is in our next one-to-one after the team meeting, we'll review and see if we need to make any more adjustments or amendments from both of our perspectives.
Okay, Taylor, that makes sense to me. Thank you.
And end scene. So we are still awaiting for our Academy Awards, which might not be forthcoming, but hopefully you were able to see there some of the skills and some of the ideas from the framework that we were suggesting there. So final points from me before I hand over to Danny to talk about a more realistic case study, although that might be something that you've come into contact with before. So for me, the key learnings there was demonstrated how to give that behavioural feedback without judgment. Like I said, I very much own that from that topic and that conversation, and very much without judgment. I used invitational language. So have you noticed? What were your thoughts? What would you suggest that we did to make sure that we had an open dialogue and really encourage that shared responsibility and having that shared goal that we were both wanting to work towards as well, so that we both agreed on that responsibility for improvement as well. So that's a lot of content from me. What I'll do is I'll hand back over to Danny now. I'll stop sharing my slides and you can take over on that, Danny, from your side. But hopefully you found that useful from the content and the theory part. So Danny, over to you for the case study.
Lovely. Thanks, Ollie. That's really helpful. And just to say, when we role play these things and you get into the mindset, it does feel like you're part of a conversation. And I think from my point of view in that particular role play, one of the things that helped me not to escalate and get emotional is that kind of natural neutrality that Ollie brought to his role as Taylor. I didn't feel judged. He was sharing his observation, and he was clearly seeking to work in partnership to to address that. So that helped me to stay unreactive, shall we say. But let me bring up this case study now. And as I said, this is a real example. Looking at Ollie now. Is that come up, Ollie? Can you see that? Oh, I've gone right to the beginning. There we go.
Yeah, that's come through, Danny.
It's come through, great. Okay, so now this is a real example. It's something I was personally involved with. I've changed all the names. So Rob and Andy aren't the real people involved, but that's what we'll call them for the sake of this case study. How did I get involved? Well, I support different leadership communities in my role. I was approached by one colleague here at the university who'd found themselves in a difficult relationship with a member of their team. They'd had a number of interactions over email that escalated quite quickly. They tried to address it face to face. It had got worse, and they were considering taking formal action. So it was getting to not quite crisis point, but it was moving in that direction. I provide one-to-one coaching support to leaders and managers across university, and it was in the context of one of those conversations that we thought about how we might be able to address this particular situation. Now, for those of you that do work in the university, I just want to flag something at this point. If you find yourself in conflict and you feel you can't always address it yourself, my advice would always be speak to your HR team. They will give you the advice on how to resolve things informally, and if there are formal steps to take, they'll guide you through that. So that's always your first point of call. One of the actions or one of the interventions that they may recommend is what we call mediation, where we have a professional facilitator to mediate the conversation between two individuals or two groups. It's a very powerful informal method that I would personally recommend. And I would just say this is the approach I would go down. In this example, because of our informal relationship, we're able to find a way to enable this person to have a challenging conversation. So a bit more information then about the disagreement. So as I say, it's taking place over email, and I've kind of summarized the perspective of Rob and Andy. So for this example, Rob was the manager and Andy was a member of the team. So I'm going to read this from Rob's perspective. I have a set of responsibilities as manager to follow procedures, and asking for things. In just a moment. I'm just going to move this sidebar in the way. Right, here we go. Sorry, I have a set of responsibilities as manager to follow procedures. Andy keeps asking for things in short timeframes. On this occasion, he asked me to bend the rules in order to extend a member of his team's contract. I can't do that. There's a process to follow. When I told him that, he behaved unreasonably and said I was being unfair on the individual. When I said his behaviour was inappropriate, he said I was being unreasonable in my behaviour. I can't win. Okay, that's Rob's perspective. This is Andy's perspective. I needed to reassure my staff member whose contract is running out. We'd had it agreed, but I just needed to provide some reassurance as it all goes through. When I asked Rob for this, he said it can't be confirmed, which was actually very stressful for the staff member. So when I raised these concerns, he told me I was behaving inappropriately. I don't know how to communicate my concerns without being told off. Okay, so hopefully you can see there's two different perspectives there on the same scenario. Okay, so after speaking with Rob, who brought this issue to me, I suggested that that I help them both have a challenging conversation together, and I help to facilitate that conversation by being involved. In order to do so, it's important for me to understand a bit more on the scenario. So, as Ollie described before, it's the intention often that causes the conflict. It's the beliefs that people hold that actually cause the problem. So I asked if I could meet with both Rob and Andy separately. When I did so, this is what I discovered. So Rob actually felt that Andy was trying to put himself in the good light with his staff member by fighting his cause and putting him, Rob, in the bad light as the evil bureaucratic manager. And underneath all of this, what I discovered in conversation with Rob was this underlying assumption. Andy doesn't respect my authority and is trying to undermine me. That's what was underneath all this. He just felt he wasn't respected. When I spoke to Andy, this is what I learned from him. Andy felt that Rob was trying to prove who's boss, and that doesn't seem to want to help or work with him, just against him. His underlying assumption was he worried that there was some professional rivalry at play here, and wanted to put Andy back in his box. Okay, so under the surface, this is what was really going on. So I invited them both to have a conversation together that I would facilitate. I explained in that meeting we weren't going to focus on the content of the discussion, the whole thing around the contract and when it was going to be agreed and what the progress was. That's for them to sort out. The issue for us was how to remove the obstacles in their relationship so they could communicate better, to get this tension out, to resolve this conflict that they're experiencing with each other, to allow them to have more constructive conversations. It was so important to get underneath what was going on, to examine these assumptions, to understand each other's tensions, and to resolve them. So in the conversation itself, I asked them both to focus on listening to each other. If we go back to Ollie's methodology there, asking questions, being curious. What were the intentions of each other in what they said and did? Why did they say what they said? What do they mean by it? What do they care about? And the advantage at times having a facilitator in the room is we can create the space for that. You know, if you think about when you've been in conflict or arguments, they often are talking over each other, trying to make your points. Often when we find ourselves in conflict, we listen less and want to talk more, want to really prove what we feel and think. So having a facilitator there in this way, it creates that opportunity to really focus on listening to each other. So that's what we did. I also asked them to explain their intention behind their behavior. So yes, you know what the email said and how you articulated that to each other. What did you mean behind it? What was the intention? And asked them and invited them and encouraged them to share that intention. And secondly, how do they experience each other's behavior? So often we have an intention and we behave in accordance to that, but the other person can often misinterpret that behavior in a different way, or the behavior we choose sometimes isn't very well reflected in our intentions. You know, there could be some frustrations in there, a little bit of emotion in there that can just change how our behavior comes across. So to share with each other how we experience that behavior was a really important part of the process. And in doing all this, by raising intentions, by sharing experience of each other's behaviors, we're looking for opportunities to acknowledge cross wires with respect to intention and assumption. So this is what came out of it all. Rob ultimately understood and recognized that Andy was just trying to help his team member. That was his intention. He also recognized that Andy has a different style to him. So Andy he liked to move very quickly to get things done, liked a quick answer, liked to resolve things quite quickly. Whereas Rob preferred to take time, follow procedures, reflect, and those styles had come in tension, essentially, in conflict. Rob also recognised that Andy didn't understand the full context. So Rob, being the manager, appreciated all the HR rules that were in place, rules that Andy didn't appreciate at that particular time, and therefore was trying to circumnavigate some of those procedures. And the key thing was, and this was a really important difference that emerged in the conversation, Rob recognised that Andy does respect him, and his behaviour wasn't reflective of a lack of respect for him, is reflective of a frustration with the system. From Andy's point of view, He came to understand that Rob was doing the right thing for everyone, was following the procedures and trying to be fair in accordance to the rules. He recognised that Rob was under enormous pressure. As a senior leader in the area, he had loads of considerations and was trying to do the right thing. He also recognised there was more going on and it wasn't an easy decision as he'd requested it. He couldn't just give him the answer that Andy felt he needed at that moment in time. There were other considerations at play. And this was the key thing for Andy. He recognised that a large part of the tension that existed was linked to Rob not feeling respected by him. These are my reflections from that experience. The tension was resolved by raising each other's understanding of each other's intentions and how each other experienced each other's behaviour. The conversation worked well as Andy and Rob wanted to resolve their differences. They were both curious about each other's needs and both took responsibility for their own emotions and behaviour. They both wanted to find a way to communicate better and agreed an approach to speak face to face if it was a sensitive issue in future. Having eliminated unhelpful assumptions from their relationship, i.e., he doesn't respect me or he is jealous of my success, the relationship is in a better place to address disagreements in future. So I thought it'd be helpful to maybe share some questions for you. These are rhetorical questions to take away and ponder over if you find yourself in a conflict situation or just a tension in a relationship. But before I share these questions, I'm going to come back to the point I made right at the beginning. And it's to say, essentially, that not all workplace conflicts will look like this, okay? Some will feel more severe. You may feel that you've exhausted some of these avenues. So always, please, seek HR support, and mediation may be an appropriate intervention in future. However, if you are experiencing relationship tension, please ask yourself, what's the cause of your frustration? What do you assume? What do you believe the other person wants based on their behavior, based on what they said? What do you believe is behind all that? Do you have evidence for this belief? Do you think there could be other interpretations of how they're behaving? What can you do to better understand their intentions? What do you know of the effect of your own behavior on them? And do you care enough about this relationship to have a challenging conversation? And my final point is a good rule of thumb. If you're in dispute with someone and it's a sensitive issue, email is not a good platform for resolving it. Okay, that's all we're going to say on this. I'm going to hand back to yours now for any questions that have emerged throughout the course of the session.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, would you like to thank Danny and Ollie for a great presentation and also examples, and also for the Oscar-winning performance as well. So just to remind people that there's a lot of things to pack in. So if you do have any questions, please put it on the chat. I'm happy to read out, or if it's more complex, we can always invite you to speak out yourself. So I think there's one here already. Oh yeah, so thankful. So I just want to let me just start with my question, if that's all right. So I think you mentioned as well at the end there, Danny, about some tips there, that sometimes written, communication sometimes could be tricky as well. So basically we do get, like Ollie mentioned in the beginning, if we do have conflicts, take pause 2 to 3 seconds. I found that really, really useful, and just remind me that as well. But if you do get conflicts, from like emails or anything written communication, can you please give us like more like practical methods and how to handle, difficult conversation through this medium?
Yeah, conflict over email is a very, very common thing. And one of the problems, of course, that you find with email conflict is you're often interpreting the tone in the email. You're reading black and white words and you're having to put in what you perceive as the tone and the intention behind what's said there. When we speak face to face, we're not just listening to the content of the words, we're actually getting a sense of the tone or the body language. There's more information. There is limited information on email, and it's very, very easy to impose our own beliefs onto that. So if you feel you're in conflict and disagreement on email, my top tip would be to have that conversation, whether it be a phone call, whether it be a Teams chat, if you work in close proximity face to face, because there's much more channels of communication open to you when you do it face to face or verbally than there is via email. So that'd be my top tip.
Okay, fantastic. So we're still waiting some more comments from people. I think a lot of people just sort of praise your fantastic presentation. So yes, I'll probably kick off with the next question. So so a lot of people here, you know, are doing research, so especially the junior members, so they tend to be, you know, have different supervisors, you know, up to 4 we are allowed to, and usually you have one lead supervisor. So for example, if you do then get conflicts, you know, imagine yourself as a junior member in that shoes, and then you have, you know, your main supervisor say this, other supervisors saying thing, and there's a conflict in terms of the direction of work that you want to do. How would you advise, you know, tips, you know, to handle this situation? So any of you can, you know, or both can answer this, if that's all right.
Yeah, I don't want to start it all if you want to come in. It's very difficult if the conflict is with you and your line manager. If it is not with your direct line manager, then I would always suggest to go to your line manager and get their advice, or indeed maybe someone who you trust, who's on a similar position within the hierarchical structure. But it is very difficult. I think if you feel confident enough, then taking the approach of which Ollie outlined to communicate, you know, your experience of that tension or that difficulty with your supervisor, I think is appropriate. But it does kind of depend on the point that Ollie raised around psychological safety. Do you feel safe enough to do that? If you don't, then I would seek either a trusted, more experienced colleague, or indeed your supervisor's line manager if necessary, if it came to that point. But yeah, there's quite a few factors there really before to consider, I suppose, before we can give necessarily direct advice on a hypothetical situation. Yeah, mentors outside. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Beverly pop something, a great idea into the chat, and I think it is always good to have that sounding board. I just really reiterate the point that obviously if you are going to a mentor or something from the basis of confidentiality and preserving relationships, that if you are seeking that advice, try and anonymize it where possible, or come up with some fictitious names like Danny and I have done for our role plays as well, because obviously that can build on that psychological safety element as well. I think there's also a few things again, and I go back to that respond rather than react. So I think asking yourself a few key questions of, well, what do you want to achieve for yourself, for the relationship with that other person, but also for the piece of work that you are wanting to do together. Equally, what's your common goal? Where do you have agreement? Maybe start there. Don't focus on the disagreement like Danny said in his case study. Where do you have current agreement, and start from that positive mindset in the first instance? Because I think if you're starting in that positive place, then it's much more likely that that's the way that the conversation will flow as well. Whereas if we start with the disagreement straight away, you're probably going to get stuck at loggerheads and not be able to see past that.
Yeah, good point, Ollie. And just looking at the comment there around a senior colleague is no instigator. I think what can often happen is, particularly in a senior position, is because people don't necessarily give you feedback, because maybe feel intimidated by the role or it's not their place. That can kind of incubate a sense of lack of self-awareness on how behaviour is translated. There's been many occasions that I've been involved in situations like this, and the moment the senior person becomes aware of the impact of their behaviour, particularly in junior colleagues, they're often mortified. The last thing they want to do is create a negative response, but it's a lack of self-awareness, sometimes a lack of emotional intelligence that can mean that they're not aware. So it's around creating an opportunity to raise that awareness. And we mentioned a few opportunities there, speaking to an experienced mentor, the individual's line manager themselves, HR colleagues as well, and also mediation. Within mediation, it equalizes the hierarchy. It gives equal platform to both individuals, and it encourages both people involved to listen to each other. And that can be a very powerful intervention, particularly when there's a hierarchy involved.
And yeah, so we got possibly perhaps one last question before we close the meeting. So from Leah Quinlivan, so the questions asked: have you any tips or resources for neurodivergent people? Example, autism and ADHD.
Yeah, it's a very important question. I'm actually attending some training soon around having compassionate conversations for neurodivergent colleagues. I hope to learn new ways to address that challenge. On the approach that we currently take, we don't specify for colleagues who are autistic or have ADHD. So I'm not going to attempt to offer some tips on there. However, from what we learn from this future training, we'll update our approach just to accommodate those different ways of operating. So yeah, there's more to come in that space.
Any other remarks, Ollie, if you want to add that one? Or?
No, I just reiterate what Danny said there. I mean, I'm not going to go into the space of providing tips or guidance because it's not an area that I've got a specialism or expertise on. What I would suggest, though, is if you do have concerns, like Danny has said as well, in terms of like reasonable adjustments that need to be made for these sorts of conversations, then it is best to engage with your HR colleagues to make sure that it is a compassionate and comfortable conversation that you're having. And as well, obviously, neurodiversity is such a broad range as well. I think that there's not just one guidance that would work across all, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I will just allow a last one question, really. I think we have to make close after this. Jessica Kendall asking, she was wondering whether if you could touch on how unconscious bias play a part in this process.
Yeah.
A huge part, isn't it? Absolutely. We all carry our biases, don't we, around, influenced by our life experience, and that affects how we receive and how we interpret people's behavior. So I think it plays a huge role. And the process of examining your own assumptions and remaining curious about others' intentions, that's the process to help us to stand away from the unconscious bias lens that we carry. So I think remaining and having an open mind, recognizing we carry assumptions and unhelpful beliefs at time, and really being curious about others' intentions. I think that's a mindset to have if we're trying to avoid that.
Okay, so just before we go, just checking the slides that you posted earlier, because I think a lot of people are actually outside University of Leeds. Would you be, is it okay for me to share them separately after the meeting? Would that be okay?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Please
So what
do.
we'll do. Thank you. Yeah. So what we'll do is we will get one of our administrator to email everyone who attended live today a copy of that presentation that was pasted, and also send link for feedback as well. So again, so I'd just like to share the screen again about our. So if you have your phone with you, if not, don't worry. We will send you a link with that slides that have been posted earlier. So basically, if you can scan your QR code, and we would really value your feedback, what went well today and what could be improved, and certainly what are the topics that you want us to incorporate, because we are organizing this for everyone's continuous professional development. And because it's only take about 2 minutes, and you'll get one of the most fancy certificate that you can put that on your portfolio. So yeah. We're gonna draw the meeting to the end. So I just really want to say thank you so much for Danny and Ollie. Really engaging presentation with some real life examples. Like you say, you usually do this course for a few days, and you comprise it in an hour, and I found it really interesting, and I learned myself greatly as well. So I'd like to thank everyone as well for staying and also participating in this session. This is our last session until we have a summer break. So hopefully we will plan to continue again, from September, October at the end of the year with more topic and content. And yeah, so have a good afternoon, everyone, and take care. Okay.
Thank you. Thanks
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Cheers.